Hello, my friends. My name is Gerdes. Here are the three big stories for today. So the first is one of the stupidest things that the Russians have done, among stupid things, was they're suspected of jamming the GPS signal of an aircraft carrying Grant Shaps. Now, if you're trying, they talk all the time like, we're gonna do this and we're gonna do that, and like that's hyperbole. That's over the top. That's not actually escalating. It's just trying to posture. It's kind of like the insecure guy that doesn't actually know, martial arts, who was all like, "Whoa," right? He doesn't actually know it, but he's trying to like make it look like he's peacocking, right? Trying to look tougher than he is. They do that, but they don't actually want to knock this plane out of the sky with Grand Chaps on it. Because if you kill this secretary, then you have a whole different problem set on your hands, and potentially a war with Britain, which you don't actually want. Russia is believed to have jammed the satellite signal on an RAF aircraft carrying Grant Shaps back from Poland, according to government sources. Defense sources said there was no danger to Shaps, who was traveling back to the UK, though they called it a wildly irresponsible act of electronic warfare. It's understood that the GPS signal was interfered with for about 30 minutes while the plane flew close to Russia's Baltic enclave of Kaliningrad. Okay, big story number two. So Portugal, now there's a multi-part story here. Portugal pledged $100 million to the Czech scheme for ammunition for Ukraine. That's 100 million euros. That's why it's 109. Okay. Now, with that, Scholz announces the creation of a coalition of allies for long-range artillery for Ukraine. He announced, "We are creating a new coalition of long-range artillery forces," Chancellor Scholz said at a press conference along with the French head of state Emmanuel Macron and Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk. Okay. He said, "Among other things, we will now purchase even more weapons for Ukraine on the entire world market." Okay, but why weren't they purchasing it on the world market before? Because while they were going to provide 1 million artillery shells, they weren't going to let it be produced outside of Europe because they wanted to keep the money in Europe. So now they're getting the memo that, if the US hasn't stepped up, we have to do something. We better get it from anywhere that we can, and they're doing it. To their credit, they're doing it. But like everything else in this war, we're doing everything too late, and Ukrainians are paying the cost in their lives. Okay, here's another article related to the same thing. Scholz, more arms for Ukraine, and here's Macron, Scholz, and Tusk. Those arms will be purchased on the global market. However, the Chancellor also added that we will increase military arms production capacity, also in cooperation with our partners on the ground in Ukraine. Moreover, Scholz said that we will use windfall profits. Now listen to this. We will use windfall profits from Russian assets frozen in Europe to provide financial assistance to Ukraine as well as purchase further arms. This is why you got to get into the weeds of the article, not just read the headlines, because I would have missed that little piece of the puzzle. So what they're doing is they're not actually seizing Russian assets, but they're using the interest on their Russian assets, the windfall profits, in order to purchase the arms. Scholz and Macron have adopted different strategies when it comes to Ukraine, with the French leader being far more hawkish than Scholz, and Macron, to his credit, has really stepped up in a meaningful and significant way. Scholz's supporters have called him a peace chancellor. That just sounds way too much like World War II, peace in our times kind of something, who aims to avoid an escalation toward war with Russia and NATO members. Okay, but the way to avoid escalation with a bully is to meet him, not to back down and go, "Oh, you know what, right?" When you back down from a bully gets more emboldened. So you got to be really careful with that. "We must do everything that we can to organize as much support as possible for Ukraine," Scholz said on Wednesday, and as he highlighted the very practical question of whether there is enough ammunition, whether there's enough artillery, whether there's enough air defense, many things that play a major role, he said. Okay, but then there is a little bit more here in this other article. Germany, France, Poland agree to buy weapons. "We support Ukraine, but we are not at war with Russia." Now that's true, but his going out of his way to emphasize that kind of thing is part of the appeasing kind of nature. And yeah, I get it. You're Germany. If Germany just wanted to say, we're not providing anything military, we're going to be the humanitarian leader because we remember the 20th century. We just don't want to go there. That's cool. We could have said, fine, that's your role. We'll do the other stuff. But he's just the mentality is appeasement. Now, he's not alone. The mentality from Biden was, we don't want to trigger these red lines. We don't want to trigger these red lines. And then they would cross one after another, after another, after another, but after months of delay and delay and delay. And so that's why we're 750 days in at this point. Okay. Let's go back over to what's going on in the United States. Republicans for Ukraine launch a new ad to increase support for discharge petition. So there's two competing discharge petitions. You're probably aware of that. There's one that was created by Republicans, and then there was another one created by Democrats. The one created by the Republicans is altered terms, something different than what it was before, a little less money for Ukraine. Now, on the other side, the Democrats put one forward, and it's basically the Senate bill as a discharge petition. And it's hard for Republicans to sign on to the Democrat one, but it's also hard for the Democrats to sign on to the Republican one. And both sides have said, we're really not going to, but that they're out there is actually going to push things forward, I believe. Now, Republicans for Ukraine launch a new ad to increase support for the petition for a long shot bid to bring a vote on Ukraine aid to the House floor. So it is a long shot bid. I'm not counting on the discharge petitions, but the discharge petitions could be enough pressure to push Speaker Johnson forward. Let's hope. Republicans for Ukraine announced Thursday it launched a $260,000 ad campaign to pressure House Republicans to sign a discharge petition in the Senate's Ukraine aid bill, an effort that requires 218 signatures. 60-second ad features Republican voters speaking about why lawmakers should support Ukraine. I wanted to highlight this quote. "You're not being conservative if you're not standing up for democracy," close quote. A South Carolina Republican says in the video. Yeah, this is what I keep telling you. Like when you guys are like, those darn conservatives, they're all this and they're all that. Honestly, the conservative Republicanness that I know, that I always grew up in, that I'm part of, that I'm still part of, that I haven't left, thinks like that you're not being conservative if you're not standing up for the democracy. So, okay, that just resonated with me. Okay, here we go. Next article, Johnson tells senators he's still looking for a path on Ukraine aid. Mike Johnson told these Republicans in a closed-door meeting he's still looking for it. But, honestly, you could do, okay, look, I'm not even going to read the highlights here. You could do one of two things. You could either pass the Senate bill, and that's fine. That right there, you get it done. And it's not everything that you want, but it's something. Or the Democrats in the Senate could take up H2 and say, if we take up H2, if we pass H2, you give us everything we want on Ukraine, and they could cut the deal. But they just keep fighting with each other instead of cutting the deal. They'll get to it eventually, but eventually cost time and lives, and that's the problem. One of the things that they said in this article was that they expect to see this package sometime after March. McCall and Johnson would put a House Foreign Aid bill on the floor, and the Appropriations Committee is done. The federal government faces another deadline to avert a partial government shutdown on March 22nd. Once we clear that bar, hopefully we'll see something on the table, but good grief, it's been way too long. Okay, remember we talked about Gerasimov might have been killed? Well, he wasn't killed. He's apparently alive and well. I had egg on my face at the time, but okay, we get things wrong sometimes, but we have to admit it. So here's Gerasimov and Shoigu, and you don't even need to say men that look like Gerasimov and Shoigu casting their vote at the so-called presidential elections. The so-called part of presidential elections I can get, but I mean, men that look like, yeah, let's just say that they're Gerasimov and Shoigu unless we're proven otherwise. But this I thought was awesome. Russians advancing. Great news. Just not our Russians. Now, in reality, it looks like the Russian Legion isn't making that great progress coming across the border in Russia, but that they've actually come across the border at all is a big burr under Putin's saddle, and that's the value in it, just in and of itself. They didn't take over Belgorod or anything along those lines. All right, thank you for your time. Thank you for the likes, the shares, the subscribes, and the coffees, and thank you for being the kind of person that cares about Ukraine.